Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nate Persley. I'm co-director of the Stanford Cyber Policy Center and its program on democracy and the internet. And we are honored today to have one of our postdocs, Alessandro Vecchiato, who is both postdoc at PDI and generally works at the Cyber Policy Center, an expert on all things algorithmic and social media, Twitter research as well. And a host of other papers that you should check out. Today, though, he'll be talking about a really sort of innovative project on looking at the effect of algorithms on election information. And so he'll speak for half an hour or so, and then please put questions into the chat, into the Q&A, and I will ask them of him. And and I'll probably, as is my tradition, poke him with a few questions of my own right after he finishes. So Alessandro, take it away. And you've got to unmute.
Thank you so much, Nate, for the introduction. I'm very excited to present new work here at the Cyber Policy Center seminar. I also would like to thank the audience that is following us remotely, and I'm very excited about the Q&A after. The exposure to diverse viewpoints is the essence of the democratic process. In every democracy, we will have parliaments discussing from different aisles, from a different extreme of the political spectrum, points of view that then end up being condensed into the law. However, this has hardly ever been true for voters themselves. Research in sociology has shown a significant amount of network homophily among a group of friends and among co-workers, in that also in terms of political leaning. Other evidence in economics has shown significant partisanship by newspapers, and how that is related to demand effects, that is from the demands of people that buy the newspaper, that want to have a particular slant. And finally, the introduction of cable television has amplified the spectrum of political view that are made possible. And there are papers that have shown quite significantly, actually twice, that Fox News specifically actually was able to tilt the political view of their viewers toward the Republican Party. With algorithmic newsfeed, it seems that the problem has intensified, and this is specifically for the affordances that algorithmic newsfeeds have, the speed at which information can spread online, the quantity of information that has been produced, and these two particular qualities have led technology platform to create an algorithm that will organize the information in order to offer to their user the best possible information. However, this has also created another affordance, which is the amount of precision with which each user can receive information tailored to their own preferences. This has opened up, obviously, we are not unfamiliar with this here at the Cyber Policy Center, problem of computational propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation, which are very big issue plaguing the internet right now. But for the time being for the time of this talk, I'm not gonna focus on disinformation and misinformation, but instead on the technology itself and what are the implications of algorithmic newsfeed. As they were introduced, there was a big uproar, like by many commentators, who was trying, suggested that this technology will lead us to live in a personalized universe of information. Notoriously, Constantine, in his book, Republic.com, also was thinking about the daily me and how each and every one of us will receive a communication packet just for us. And I'm sure many of you have read the op-ed that Inepi Tufekci presented about YouTube on the New York Times now 4 years ago, in which he was claiming that YouTube would be becoming the great radicalizer. YouTube often feed far right, and far left videos to users who watch, even those that watch relatively mainstream news sources. So the prevalent narrative on the popular discourse is about how algorithmic news feeds can become radicalizing forces. However, the evidence that we got just last year about exactly this problem shows that the problem is more circumscribed with respect to especially YouTube, the YouTube algorithm. A new paper by Brendan Nehan and co-author last year presented evidence that showed that approximately only 1 in 10 users on average is exposed to alternative content. And that exposure to alternative content jumps to like around 40% only for users that actively engage alternative or extreme content. So the percentages are still problematic, of course, but far away from YouTube being the great radicalizer. Other evidence about other platform now, YouTube, have shown that most users have moderate news diets. This evidence comes from a paper by Andy Gatt that was presented again also last year, but shows data from 2015 and 2016. And the striking finding about the result is that both Republican and Democrat users have relatively overlapping in terms of ideological leaning news diet. And that is also true for independents. This apparent contrast between what is the prevalent narrative and what actually is the evidence that we have about the role of algorithmic newsfeed on election and or the democratic process, to me, can be reconducted to two big issues. The first one is a general lack of access to the data from researcher that leads a journalistic narrative to spread more easily and more often with respect to scientific evidence. This is not the only, obviously not the only problem that comes from the lack of data access, but this creates many difficulties for researchers to study this issue, in part because they can oftentimes only rely to data that are provided by the platform. They lead oftentimes not to real understanding, causal understanding of the relationship between algorithms and the information ecosphere, but instead about descriptive statistics and descriptive evidence. And third, the big aspect that in general goes unnoticed is the role of the algorithm itself, the fact that the algorithm changes over time and needs to be studied on its own, while instead using data that are coming from the platform is only possible to really study the result as they come in that particular time where the data were collected. And there is no possibility for the researcher to manipulate the algorithm itself in order to see what are the potential other outcomes if we were not to design the platform the way they are. However, these are not the only problem related to studying newsfeed. There is also, in general, somehow the understanding of the problem lead to a conceptual confusion and uncertainty. What we want to try to do with the project that I'm presenting today is focus the attention on the user platform interaction that drives actually the outcomes. The users select what to consume from what the algorithm feeds them. Then the algorithm update what is going to present to the user based on the user activity. And these lead to significant uncertainty from the point of view of studying this problem. First of all, because as a result of this interaction, algorithms output diversify. And so what is true for one user is not true for the other. And so the real impact of the algorithm become more difficult to understand. But also because theories of information processing tell us that we should be skeptical from drawing conclusion from exposure itself, as they're leading to specific outcome as well. For instance, we can think about motivated reasoning, and there are a lot of studies that show that mere exposure doesn't necessarily lead to outcome going in the same direction. Brendan Ian, for instance, an author that I studied before about the YouTube algorithm study, also has a study about the backfire effect of being exposed to the other contrasting point of view or an opposing point of view. What we want to focus then with the study again is the study of interaction between the algorithm and the user. And we want to do, and in this study, we want to answer a more expanded set of research questions, not looking at just a consumption and exposure that has been done so far, which is an absolutely very important point, but not at the end of the story of the impact of the algorithm. And also try to draw results on how personalization in algorithm is affecting voting and turnout. In order to derive conclusions about these two research questions, we look first at the role of the user. We manipulate the algorithm directly. We offer the user with different kinds of personalization, high level of personalization and low level of personalization, and monitor the process of the interaction by recording consumption, by recording effects on belief, effect on turnout, and effects on vote choice. We designed this study in the experiment in Switzerland. There are a number of reasons why we decided to do this experiment in Switzerland. Importantly, because of constraints given by the funding, we were able to secure funding for this study by the Swiss National Academy of Science. But also Switzerland is an interesting place within the spectrum of the evidence that there has been collected so far on the role of algorithms and political behavior, because it will offer us the opportunity to provide evidence about Europe, which has so far not been included as much as the United States into study in this problem. Switzerland is also easier in terms of analytical understanding of what are the impact, because there's an ideologically clear and diversified media environment. So it was easier for us to code the sources of information on the political spectrum, and therefore derive an understanding from the point of view of what the user political view were and what was their news diet, the ideological leaning of their news diet. There are two other reasons why Switzerland is particularly interesting. First, because it has a large population that is not on social media. And part of the question that is important to answer when looking at this question is whether the impact of social media themselves compared to a world without social media, which is obviously a very difficult answer to get, and all the marginal variation and experiment that have been possible so far with data directly from the platform have not been able to tackle necessarily this question as well. And the last one is because we could offer cultural variation, which was nice to have, so not to think that it was our results were driving from a particular media environment, a French-speaking or a German-speaking, and therefore also the somehow different tradition journalism, but we could offer evidence that will least branch these two. It was also very interesting to do it in Switzerland because we were able to run this experiment during a real election. A real election in Switzerland called their citizen for election and referendums 3 times a year. So the referendum that we focused on was not a rare occasion or a special election. In other case, it was a particular standard and normal procedure for Swiss citizens. And we focused on the referendum that happened last June, in June 2021, because they offer objects that were of particular interest in the sphere of information online. It would tackle questions that were also pertain to other countries, were not specific to Switzerland, and question of like premier importance with respect to the topic itself. The question about ecology, there were two objects that were about one about clean water and one about a ban on pesticides. And here on the slide, you see a banner that was presented during the political campaign. There was a very important topic about the COVID-19 restriction and whether Swiss wanted to increase or decrease the restriction related to COVID-19 after the vaccine became available. A fourth top object that was about greenhouse gases and what should be done in order to tackle climate change, and a very important anti-terrorism law. We thought that choosing this particular referendum will also give us information regarding what is the role of political campaign in this space and how they interact with the algorithmic newsfeeds. So I team up with two researchers, Professor Alexander Drexel at the University of Lucerne in Switzerland, and Andrea De Angelis, that is a postdoc researcher and lecturer at the university. And we contacted a local, a Swiss polling company that will collect a representative sample of user for us. And the innovation that we decided to use for this particular experiment is to design our own news feed that will allow us to overcome all the difficulty about data access and experimentation that I described before. The app was programmed by a professional programmer, and it became available on the App Store and on the Android store. This is another feature that is important to notice because the design of the experiment is meant to be globally replicable. We were gonna offer evidence today about Switzerland, but in principle, this experiment can be run everywhere around the world. And this is something that we thought was very, very important because results about as users change and diversify around different culture and a different level of digital literacy, if this design would allow us in the future to derive potentially different conclusion about the relationship between newsfeed and an election. The app itself is organized as a normal social media app with respect to the newsfeed. It has an infinite scroll, which collects sources across the political spectrum. And the sources are real newspapers, real outlets that are present in Switzerland. Of course, depending on the language of the user, we will offer sources in French or sources in German. It offers the information through an algorithmic ranking that we try very hard to mimic the one Facebook algorithm. Of course, it will never be identical, but we try to collect exactly, at least to the best of our knowledge, the information that Facebook uses for their algorithmic ranking system, which are clicks, likes, and share, and then use them as input within our app for the creation of personalized newsfeed. We offer two different manipulations to the user, a high personalization and a low personalization. The high personalization has about 80% of newsfeed that are personalized and at 20% non-personalized that could be considered sort of a random, but that is offered to allow the algorithm to learn from that variation, and a low personalization algorithm that instead has 20% personalized information, 80% non-personalized information. The design of the survey is somehow, of the study is somehow standard. We had a representative sample that Vilendi, the polling company, collected for us. That was block randomized to ensure that we have a sufficient variation in terms of age, gender, level of education, as we assume, we expect this variable to somehow allow for variation in the treatment effect of being exposed to an algorithm. We asked the user to participate in a baseline survey that was that included a battery of questions regarding political behavior, focused on the referendum, so whether they wanted to participate in the referendum, how they felt about the referendum, how they would what would be their position, a battery of demographics information, and a battery of question related to the use of social media in order to be able to also control for that kind of variation outside of our app. And then they will be divided in 3 different groups, a control group and the 2 treatment group. They were personalized. And in the treatment condition, they were asked to use the app for 1 month. The month before the election, we timed the end of the survey with the day after the referendum, and they will be in compliance with the treatment if they were using the app that we designed for at least 10 minutes a week. And in order to participate, they had to we would incentivize them. We will give them about 18 franc, Swiss franc, for the baseline and the end-line survey, and design a scheme of incentive for the 2 personalization treatment. And then at the end of the study, we had an end-line survey that had exactly the same battery of questions as the baseline survey, but a different question regarding to the voting, not their intention about voting, but what exactly they voted in the experiment. Our sample turned out fairly similar to the real Swiss population. In terms of gender, we have a little bit more less women with respect to the Swiss population. In terms of age, our sample is a little older. It mimics relatively well the level of education. In terms of also ideology, is fairly moderate. And we had quite satisfying treatment compliance. We had an 11.7% attrition rate from the baseline of 1,700 participants. We had an end-line survey of 1,500 participants. We oversampled at the beginning in order to make sure that we'll have enough people that will comply with the use of the app, but the baseline sample was 1,700. Then we had fairly high compliance with the treatment. We had slightly higher compliance with the low personalization treatment, but in roughly 65% and 61.5% compliance for the high personalization. And we also had relatively high compliance in terms of use of the app itself. On average, user read 86.8 articles per week and read about 10, which is a relatively satisfying treatment intensity. The results are, I will start first with the results relating to consumption. We see that the manipulation actually worked well. This could also be considered a manipulation check. And we found that the user assigned to the personalized treatment at about 50%, read about 50% of news that were ideologically aligned. This is not based on a particular ideology, we just match the ideology of the user with the ideology of the article, of the news source that they were read. This is not true for what we call here the random algorithm, which is the low personalization algorithm, user read only about 60%, about 70% of news that were ideologically aligned. So we were achieving a high level of diversity in the news spectrum of consumption, news consumption, with the less randomized, with the less personalized treatment. Secondly, we also find interesting results on how, as I was discussing before, the relationship between the user own ideology and how they interact with the platform. We find interesting results connected to to the extreme of the political spectrum. Particularly, we find that personalization works very well or induce a highly hyper-partisan news consumption for people on the extreme, on the left and on the right of the political spectrum. But people that were more moderate had also more moderate news diet, which is consistent with previous evidence about online browsing, but this is just the result of the experimental manipulation and not the algorithmic newsfeed. This also implies the narrative about radicalization may only really be true for people that are that politically lie on the extreme of the political spectrum already. Surprisingly, we also find not such an effect on the random algorithm. People, even people belonging to the extreme of the political spectrum, had a relatively moderate or more diversified news diet in the random, with using the random algorithm. Then, in order to evaluate beliefs, we offer, both in the baseline and in the endline survey, ask the user to rate arguments and point of view that were connected to the 5 referendum objects. So for each object, we offer them 2 supporting arguments and 2 opposing arguments per object, to see whether there was not only a change in what they were consuming, but also a change in the way they were evaluating the object themselves as presented by the argument that we were writing. The arguments were exactly the same, and they were fairly neutral in terms of like language. For both the supporting and the opposing view, and the use and respondents were able to give a ranking. They went from 0 to 10 on each of the 4 arguments, independently from their point of view. So even people that say, even users or respondents, they said they were already deciding they will vote no to a particular object, were offered to evaluate both. And we find interesting results regarding beliefs alignment. So how much the exposure to a personalized news feed led to a change in your support for those kind of views. On the top of this graph that shows the coefficient estimate for the linear model that has on the left-hand side, the rating of the argument, on the right-hand side, the treatment condition, and a battery of other controlled to about age, political interest, political views, etc. For brevity and for clarity, I present here only the estimates regarding the treatment effects. And we find that on the top in the green, for an average effect of increased support for consistent argument, meaning for argument consistent with your pre-existing belief. The effect is small, especially if it's considered on a 0 to 10 scale, but we were able to detect, and notwithstanding our small sample size, an increase in the belief alignment induced the personalization algorithm. We are not able to reject the hypothesis, the null hypothesis, in the case of the random algorithm, showing already that that diversified news of information, a more diversified news set of information sources is more neutral in terms of the effect on beliefs. The second battery, and in blue and in red, of estimates shows instead we wanted to explore whether there was a particular an effect that was different based on whether an argument was supportive or an argument was contrary, meaning that it was easier to use for a personalized argument to convince user to support a particular view or to contrast a particular view. The estimate don't vary much. We find a slightly higher parameter estimate for supportive arguments, but the two estimates average out. They are fairly similar, so we cannot really say that it's easier or that personalization is more effective in one direction versus the other. The second to last set of results that we have concerned turnout. We wanted to then see how the exposure to our algorithm affect whether people were then more motivated to political action. And we find an effect only for a group that we call persuadable voters, so people that don't have definite political decision, therefore they hadn't decided necessarily they will vote yes or no to any of the political objects. This presents a result for all the political objects stacked, meaning that each and every object is considered along with the others. That will also increase our statistical power. But again, we find a negative, a demobilizing effect for on turnout for the group of people. They said they will probably vote. Will probably not go to vote at this election. Here, the dependent variables whether you will go to vote or you will go or you will not go to vote. So in this group of persuadable, we do find a significant effect of the personalization algorithm. When again, a more random set of newsfeed was less impactful. We do not find an effect on voting. This is the final result with respect to the outcome. We do in this graph you see instead of parameter estimate they were all around 0, so it was not particularly interesting. I wanted to show you a projection of what would be the predicted outcome of the from the treatment, and you do see there is a slight decline in the probability of voting no. Here, differently from the previous question where we will ask the user, the respondents, whether they were likely or not likely to go to vote. Here, the dependent variable is whether about their position, whether they were certain they will vote no to an object or certain they will vote yes to an object. We find a slight decline in those who say they will probably vote no, but that effect is not statistically significant. Interestingly, we do find a statistically significant effect only for one political campaign, the Water Act, the one about clean water, that might suggest then that the effect of the algorithm is moderated by the political campaign themselves, and this is something that we will work on more in the future. This research has several implications for scholarship and for policy. We wanted with this research to center the attention on the user algorithm interaction and focus on how the user ideology plays a role in how personalization works. And we do find an effect of high personalization. This is more extreme. User consume larger quantity of extreme content. High personalization also induces a belief alignment, and these two effects, according to our results, modify political behavior as well for a group of persuadable, at least in terms of turnout, even though we were not able to find a result on voting. While we do not find any effect for lower intensity personalization that appears therefore to be more neutral. in terms of their impact on society and on the political process. We do see from these results a lot of policy implication as well. We see that algorithmic technology that may realize the democratic idea of allowing people to be exposed to different point of view within a newsfeed should be allowed to do so. And the problem is that from what we see is in the design that is too much tailored toward personalization and less value, much less the idea of being exposed to democratic ideal. Of course, reaching this idea requires a reformulation of personalization beyond metrics of mere engagement. We were also surprised to find that we didn't have much of a different compliance in our experiment between people that were after the low personalization versus the high personalization. And in any case, metrics of engagement and past behavior also be connected to addiction and mental health problems. And therefore, the design itself, of personalization as it is, requires a lot of reformulation. But in order to achieve that result, we think that a lot more research is necessary. And so we offer a view that we need more regulation toward transparency. I know, Nate, you're working on a bill around this. And I think it's really, really important because, first of all, we need to know more about the effect of this platform. We were able to develop this research thanks to generous funding and a lot of effort, but it's clear that results similar to ours could easily be found or obtained if there was more transparency from the companies and the platform themselves, and also independent study of this issue by giving data access to the researchers themselves. Finally, we have several future directions which are going with this. As I said, this experiment is globally replicable. So we are starting now to think about where we should be moving next in terms of implementing this design. And we were looking also at two aspects that I wasn't able to show evidence today about, but that are absolutely very important. So how political content moderates the effect that we find. And so how much is important the rectory, because as we collected all the articles and the material that was transmitted to the user through our app, we will also be able to derive content effect as they moderate through the algorithm. And finally, we are going to be looking at how digital literacy impact both how people interacted with the app and therefore how the algorithm learned about them. And secondly, how that affected their absorption of the information from the app, and therefore how, if there is a moderating effect of digital literacy onto political behavior itself. Thank you. I'm ready now I'm excited to hear your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's so much here that we need to unpack. Let me just start with some informational questions, building on something that Magdalena Wozniak in the chat asked, which is just so we understand what you were force feeding these people, or I shouldn't say, for incentivizing. Was this all political content, or what was the composition of the newsfeed?
Yeah, it was all political content, and it was information that was derived directly from the newspaper articles that were reporting on the referendum itself.
So did you select those news articles, or were I want to say you? I mean, did you actively select them, or was the algorithm sort of canvassing everything that was produced on the topic in the relevant language, Switzerland, and then it would surface that?
Yeah, everything happened on the back end of the app, yes. But we
Okay.
coded the news sources. Beforehand, we had two coders that will assign the political leaning of the news source itself. And then we could, once we move on to the direction of the content, we can go more into the granular analysis and nuance analysis of the content itself that was presented, yes.
So just as we think about what the implications are for the conclusions, right, and how closely or not you're mimicking the real world, that the conclusion is that if people are the more that people receive and read and engage with information that is similar to their pre-existing beliefs, the more that they will, I don't know, gravitate in the direction of those beliefs. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to test a reinforcing mechanism, exactly, like based on their pre-existing. We didn't find any evidence that they were moving in the opposite direction at all. We only find the direction in which they were moving more consistently with their belief. A small effect on the supporting, on the evidence about the arguments, like whether they were supporting, how much they were supporting, or the different arguments that were going in different direction with respect to the object. A small but significant effect. And notice that in the size of our effect are particularly are small, but also the treatment intensity was particularly small. They were on the app only for 1 month, and a lot of them, we asked very little of them, like just to use the app at least 10 minutes for a week. So we were very surprised to find an effect even with such a small intervention.
And I know in the paper you talked about cross-cutting exposure. So do you find that if you give them something contra their pre-existing beliefs, it pulls them away from them, or no?
No, I mean, that was the point of having a more random algorithm, the algorithm that looks, that has less personalization. Less personalization hasn't moved anybody in any direction. We find absolutely no finding for that.
Let me just interrupt you a second, but what about deliberate attempts to, not just random, but if you're a liberal, then you get Fox News, right? And so you find that would be the corollary of what you're arguing here, right? I mean, I suppose it should still show up in the treatment with the random folks too, but I was just wondering if, algorithms, there's an empirical question as to how similar your algorithm is to, say, the YouTube and the Facebook algorithm, because they would say that no, they don't actually continually reinforce that it is more kind of pluralized, and if not random, at least it's not pre-selecting on, say, political beliefs. But one would think that if reinforcing information is leading people to be more extreme, does contra information to take them back?
Yeah, that's absolutely a corollary, and it's part of the question here. But we were more interested in understanding the effect of personalization. So all of the platform, they don't give you countervail, like cross-cutting information. Like if they're personalizing the information that you receive, they give you information consistent with what you clicked before or what you engaged with before. So that's what we really wanted to test. So the design of the experiment in itself is based on personalization only, and whether personalization has impact on the change on belief. Another experiment that we can also do if we were to change the algorithm, just expose people to cross-cutting information intentionally, but that's not within the scope of this study.
And did you look at, so you have a group of people who are on social media at the same time, and these effects, so you've got the control groups are people who were getting randomized newsfeed. I mean, they're not controlled, they're treated in a different way, but then you also are surveying general population people who are not on social media?
The people that are part of the control group are people that have not received the app. They are not being incentivized to download the app. They were randomly selected who would fit obviously in that group, but they were not offered the app itself. So are people that will have outcome as if people were not on our newsfeed at all. Then in reality, we didn't select those group of people for being people that were not on social media, but there is within our sample a sizable group of people that had never used social media before. We haven't got to the analysis of studying how the effect changes with respect to that, which is something that we can do. We just didn't get to that yet, but it's absolutely something you want to study because it's interesting in itself where the exposures to a newsfeed that changes belief or behavior differently.
Do you see any differences among the issues? The way that you presented the data, you've got all of the issues kind of lumped together, but some of them were dealing with terrorism, some were dealing with environment. It's possible that the radicalization could happen on some issues, but not all of them.
Well, I'm hearing
my mic is somehow not working. Well, answer that question. I'll try to fix my mic.
I heard you well enough. Yes. So it is absolutely possible, and we disaggregated the effect on the turnout and the effect on voting across issues. As I mentioned, because of course we could expect that the effect would differ based on the political campaign or the issue itself. We did find a different effect that is a significant effect only for the Clean Water Act. Due to personalization, all the others were in line with the average. There was no effect on voting for all the other issues, and we found an effect in line with the average for the demobilization on turnout. Yeah.
Is this better? Can you hear me better through this mic?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, and thank you, Haifa, for notifying me. All right. Let's turn a little bit to some of these other questions. Poshang Lee asks whether did the participants know the source of the news or that they only saw the title of the news?
Right. No, they did see both. They did saw the title of the news. We didn't offer them any images. They just seen the source of the news information, the title of the news, and a brief preview.
And if this is my friend Ray Barcelo, who I haven't talked to in decades, interested, he asked, is it possible that by definition, people who have extreme views inherently seek or are attracted to higher personalization? But that you would control, you're accounting for that, right? Because you don't come into it. Well, actually, how do you, the algorithm is learning as it's giving out, throughout that month, right? Or does it start that way?
Yeah, but it's designed, the parameters don't change. It learns what the user likes, but what it feeds doesn't change. So meaning that an algorithm that is 80%, the high personalization algorithm, for instance, always will offer 80% of the news being personalized, so tailored to the user behavior, and 20% not personalized. And so that stays stable throughout the experiment. Just the algorithm learns better what the user likes and not likes, and therefore is able to give a more precisely personalized set of information. So that's the only extent of learning. So to the question of whether the more extreme user seeks more higher personalization, well, that's not possible within the parameter of our study, because the extent of personalization, that's exactly what we want, what we manipulate, because that's what we wanted to study, remain stable. It's just that it's more precise as the algorithm learns more about the user, the more they use it.
Okay.
And so there is possible, and I mean, the comment then is possible that if a radical user uses the app more with respect to others, then you will have a better personalization, but not more.
Okay. Andrew Glass says, amazing presentation and study. Is there a way to recreate this study within the actual Facebook algorithm? I think we kind of know the answer to that. The answer is go work at Facebook, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, but even then, I don't know. But yes.
All right. Peter Stern. I don't know if this is the same Peter Stern who's my neighbor, but let's see here. Do your results permit you to speak to the effects of a newsfeed ranking system that is personalized, but not as to political content? So it was similar to what I was asking before. So that if you had an algorithm, a news ranking system that was sort of essentially intentionally non-political, is what I understand the question to be, would that affect things differently?
Well, that's interesting. Not on this study, but on a similar study, I looked actually at the relationship between soft and hard news. So these are not results that I presented today, but I thought I was interested in understanding the question of whether the proliferation of soft information, but that is something that's been done 2 years ago. So there was a definitely different news feed then, was actually significantly affecting the political engagement, political knowledge, in a distracting effect. And I really don't find an effect of that, in the sense that the distraction leads to less political knowledge or less political engagement. People that were politically engaged before, they were as politically engaged after. Although that study was more limited with respect to this one, it was a shorter amount of time people were exposed to the newsfeed. So there is still more research needs to be done on that topic, but I wasn't able to find any result regarding to non-political content.
Denise Tesu asks whether you introduced into your news corpus any misleading or hyper-partisan or even fake news. Do you know?
No, that we.
But how do you know?
We were very careful.
Did you didn't know everything that was possibly going to be recommended, did you?
No, we didn't know beforehand, because of course that would be fed. So it is possible that something fell through. I would be very careful about that. The sources of information that we selected were not regularly sharing any form of disinformation. And to the best of our knowledge, no, we didn't feed any fake news, and it's not intentionally to our users. We can double check for that, because that's something that I'm also very interested in. But that's another study on its own in terms of understanding whether the impact of newsfeed with fake news of off fake news have a distinct effect on political behavior.
Well, but building on that question, I mean, it is if you're going to, I mean, in a heated referendum campaign, I don't know how heated this one was. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to figure there's some kind of propagandistic or at least tilting stuff out there, right? I mean, in fact, that's what you're kind of trying to measure in some respects, right? So it's reasonable to assume that you were feeding them some kinds of, biased information, right? I mean, that's sort of the whole point, right? Yeah.
Bias for sure. Fake, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that's an age-old question, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Great. So Axel Petavin asks, I've read papers explaining that exposing users to a point of view that goes against theirs will make them even more convinced of their own opinions, or the backfire effect.
Yes.
You don't have any evidence in this on that, right?
No, we don't have any evidence. We only find evidence if you were to find an effect similar to that, we will find an effect in either direction on the less personalized algorithm, the random algorithm that had a higher concentration of information that was cross-cutting, but we don't find an effect. Actually, we find null effect for them, for that group of treatment groups. So I would definitely not have found an effect of
so Gauri Ramachandran asked this question, which is basically about how do you know whether they voted or not? Do you have validated vote, or is this just in the survey?
No, that's just in the survey. We just know whether they voted or not. Yes, that's we didn't validate.
Andrew Glass asked an interesting question about advertisements and whether advertisements kind of fed into this at all, because you're not really, I mean, all of this is actual news, right? I remain a little bit unclear how the algorithm is deciding what to feed them. Look, I'm unclear how Facebook does it too, but in terms of like how you restricted the universe of information that then would come into their feeds based off this self-selection.
We had a ranking system similarly to what Facebook. So basically, depending on the sources of we collect information about what the user was clicking on, what the user was reading, what user was sharing, because even though the app in itself was not a social media, in the sense that they didn't have any friends or information from other user of the app, everything is anonymized. So obviously they didn't know anything besides what the newsfeed that we were giving them, but we collect information on what they will share on other app, or on social media, or via text, and what they clicked in terms of like. On all of this kind of input, we collect that information, generated a ranking system that will learn from this input and with particularly predetermined weights, rank every sources of information of every article on the newsfeed as well.
What did education have a mitigating effect on the effect of the algorithm at all? Like, are more educated users less likely to become more extreme the more they get recommended this stuff, or is it irrelevant?
We want to study that question no, it's not irrelevant. But we want to study this question in conjunction with digital literacy in order to understand the different effects between digital literacy and education. Because sometimes if we were just to present the effects of education, that's just a proxy for digital literacy as well. So we want to keep that question. I didn't present any heterogeneous effect regarding education because we want to study that question with digital literacy, but it's something that we're working on.
Well, what's your hypothesis, do you think, here?
I definitely think that if we have to derive define hypotheses based on what other previous studies have seen, is that digital literacy is important, not in the sense that people are able to use the app better or like consume more or less, but the interpretation of the parameter that are given are the interface itself, the way they understand the interface itself is very, very different. So people in general that have lower level of digital literacy are more susceptible to rhetoric or inputs like likes, tweets, popularity. So to a certain extent, but that is cross-cutting respect to education. There could be people that are highly educated. So if I were to expect an effect that we will find, I would think that if we match the content, the analysis of the content with the analysis of heterogeneous effect based on digital literacy, we will find that content that it was personalized and with high intensity rhetoric or with stronger language would probably have a more impact on people with low level of digital literacy.
Well, it could also be how diverse people's sources of information are generally, right? I mean, it's so that you might think, I mean, I don't know enough about how much, say in a Swiss referendum context, people are deriving their information from the internet as opposed to television or, political party mailers or whatever else that might be. But all that other kind of interaction with the information ecosystem would seem to dilute the effect of something like an algorithm, right? Because then it's just one source of news.
Absolutely, we do control in our analysis for those kind of variation because we measure that in the survey. But that's why we were surprised also to find an effect, because this is the effect of the algorithm, notwithstanding any kind of variation that was changing due to the media environment that they were included in.
Hector Salinas asks about how much time people were spending on the app. It looked like if they were reading 9 stories in a month, my guess.
9 a week. 9 stories.
Oh, sorry, 9 a week. Yeah. So what is it?
I mean, I don't have this. We do measure the amount of time and in seconds that they spend. I don't have that figure on top of my head because I was focusing more on the quantity. But all the compliers spend at least 10 minutes a week on the app.
Okay. All right. And even because he was asking partly in relation to what, how close is this to Facebook? And then we've got, I'll just end with this question because it's accusing you of anti-Italian bias, I think, here, Alessandro. And I think that's a good way to end it, which is, what about the Italian-speaking Swiss? Why aren't you sampling them?
It was about the media environment. In the French and in the German media environment, we had a very diversified set of information sources, while the media environment, the Italian media environment, was not as rich. So we decided to do. We could only pick 2 because of funding constraint and everything that would go with it. And so, but we decided for French and German. But yes, we'll do it in Italy and in Swiss Italy, in the Italian part of Swiss. Yeah.
Right. Well, I wanted at least to have that just in case, you can at least advocate for your countrymen there. This was absolutely wonderful. There's so much that is left on undiscussed here because it's such a rich paper and experiment. If people want to contact you about this, how should they do that? Do you want to just put it in the chat or something?
Yes, I can put into the chat. This is my website, and you'll find all my contact there.
Okay. And we can put up the slide for next week if someone has that. And so next week, Kelly Bourne will be, from the Hewlett Foundation, will be moderating a discussion with Zara Takshid from University of Denver and Chris Huffnagel from just up the bay at Berkeley. And you can see Alessandro's website, well, at Twitter, it's @_A Vecchiato is probably the easiest way to contact him. Thank you very much, Alessandro. This was absolutely great. This is a whole dissertation that could be in this experiment. There's so much there, and we really appreciate it, and that it represents the best that we have here in the Cyber Policy Center and at PDI. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next week.